It began quietly, without any of the drama one might expect from betrayal, just a small compromise that seemed harmless at the time. Alex had always been the kind of person who believed rules were flexible, more like guidelines meant for those without imagination. The first time he cut corners, it didn't even feel like cheating. He was in school then, faced with a test he hadn't prepared for, and he copied a few lines from the kid sitting next to him. Nobody noticed, and more importantly, nothing bad happened. That was the seed, and like all seeds, it grew. By the time he reached university, the habit had woven itself into his way of living. He became skilled at bending rules without appearing to break them. Essays cobbled together from online articles, little white lies to professors about deadlines missed, excuses about family emergencies when he wanted more time. People admired his charm, his confidence, his ability to make things work in his favor. But beneath it all, Alex knew he was slipping further into a place where winning mattered more than honesty. The real test came when he stepped into the corporate world. In the early days, the shortcuts seemed harmless, even clever. He would adjust numbers and reports to make his team look better, take credit for ideas that weren't entirely his, or exaggerate achievements when pitching to clients. These moves earned him promotions and recognition. No one asked questions because results spoke louder than truth, and Alex always delivered results. Still, every so often, when he was alone at night, he felt a weight pressing in on him, an unease that whispered of consequences not yet visible. The line began to blur when he found himself at the center of a deal that could make or break his career. His company was competing for a major contract, one that would mean millions in revenue and cement Alex's place as a rising star. But the numbers didn't add up. Their proposal was strong but not strong enough, and Alex knew that if he presented the truth, they would lose. That night, sitting in his office with spreadsheets glowing on the screen, he felt the dilemma crush him. Should he present the honest figures and risk everything, or alter them just enough to secure the deal? He told himself it wasn't really cheating, it was survival, it was protecting his team, it was ensuring the future of the company. One small adjustment, one harmless deception. That was the justification. And so he did it. The presentation was a success. The contract was signed. His boss congratulated him in front of the entire board, praising his brilliance, his leadership, his vision. Outwardly, Alex smiled, but inwardly, the unease grew heavier. Weeks later, the first cracks appeared. The inflated numbers could not sustain themselves under scrutiny. Deadlines were missed, projections fell short, and whispers of incompetence began circling. Alex worked desperately to cover the gaps, creating more lies to shield the first one, fabricating explanations to buy time. Each new deception pulled him deeper, until the truth was no longer just bent but completely broken. The moral dilemma that once seemed like a gray area had turned into a chasm. He began to see the faces of the people affected by his choices, co-workers who would lose their jobs if the project collapsed, clients who had invested their trust and money, investors who believed his polished words. Every smile he gave felt like a mask. Every handshake was tainted with guilt. He had crossed the line, and now there was no way back without dragging others into the fallout. The unraveling came quietly, the way it had all begun. One employee raised concerns about inconsistencies. An auditor noticed irregularities in the reports. The web of lies began to tangle in on itself, and suddenly Alex was no longer admired but questioned. In meetings, the respect in people's eyes turned into suspicion. His boss, once his biggest supporter, looked at him with disappointment that cut deeper than any reprimand. The company survived, but Alex's reputation did not. He wasn't fired outright, but he was moved aside, quietly pushed out of the spotlight. The very people who had once applauded his cleverness now kept their distance. His career, once ascending, stalled. But what haunted him most was not the loss of status or opportunity. It was the moment he realized he had betrayed himself. Cheating had always seemed like a game to him, a clever way to outsmart systems built to restrain. But standing there, stripped of the admiration he had once thrived on, Alex understood the cost. The moral dilemma had not been about winning or losing, it had been about who he chose to become. And in choosing the shortcut, He had taken a road that led him somewhere he no longer recognized. It wasn't the kind of ending where lessons neatly tied themselves into redemption. Life rarely offers such clean resolutions. Alex lived on, carrying both the knowledge of his choices and the burden of their consequences. In the silence of his nights, when no applause or deals could drown it out, he faced the one truth he could no longer escape. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. He thought about it often, usually when the nights stretched too long and the quiet pressed against him like an accusation. In those hours, Alex replayed every decision, every justification he had told himself along the way. It was strange how easy the slide had been, how natural each step seemed when he was in the moment. The first line never felt like betrayal. It was practical, even necessary. He convinced himself he was protecting others, sparing them disappointment, keeping them safe. The truth was harder to face. Every lie had protected him, and him alone. The people around him began to change in ways he couldn't ignore. His colleagues stopped confiding in him, stopped trusting his words. Meetings grew colder, conversations shorter, eyes more guarded. Trust, he realized, once broken, does not fracture cleanly. It splinters into tiny shards that linger long after apologies are made. Even when he tried to rebuild, to prove himself honest, the shadow of his past hung over him like smoke that refused to clear. His personal life suffered in ways he hadn't anticipated. Friends who had once admired his success started to pull away, sensing the falseness beneath the surface. Relationships crumbled under the weight of unspoken truths. He remembered one moment in particular, sitting across from someone he cared for, watching her eyes fill with disappointment as she whispered, "I don't know who you are anymore." Those words cut deeper than any reprimand at work, because they were true. He no longer knew who he was either. The strangest part was how ordinary life seemed to continue. The world didn't collapse, the company didn't implode, and Alex wasn't dragged into court or splashed across headlines. Instead, the punishment was quieter, more insidious. He carried on, but every door that opened seemed to close a little faster. Every opportunity came with a question mark. Every victory tasted hollow. He was living proof that sometimes consequences don't come in dramatic waves, they come in whispers, in slow erosion, in the silence that follows when trust is gone. And yet, part of him still wondered if he could have stopped himself. Was there a moment, a single decision where he could have chosen differently and turned back? Or was the path inevitable, laid out the first time he decided the rules were meant to be bent? These thoughts gnawed at him, feeding both guilt and resignation. Over time, Alex began to see the true cost of his choices, not the money lost, nor the job titles stripped away, but the erosion of his own reflection. Every act of cheating had chipped something from him until the man staring back in the mirror was a stranger. He had crossed the line not once, but again and again, until the line itself vanished from sight. And in the quiet of those nights, when memories replayed like unfinished conversations, Alex faced the question that would never leave him. Was it worse to have been caught, or to know he had willingly traded the person he could have been for the person he had become? As the years pressed on, Alex discovered that the consequences of cheating did not vanish with time. They lingered, shaping every new choice he made. It wasn't the scandal people remembered anymore. Most had moved on, too busy with their own lives to dwell on his mistakes. But Alex carried it within himself, like a scar that others couldn't see, but he could never forget. It became a lens through which he viewed the world, and it poisoned even the simplest interactions. When he walked into interviews for new opportunities, the questions seemed ordinary, but his mind twisted them into hidden accusations. When someone praised his work, he wondered if they would feel betrayed once they learned who he really was. Even when trust was offered, he struggled to accept it because he no longer trusted himself. At family gatherings, the tension showed in subtle ways. His parents, proud once of his quick rise, now spoke about him in guarded tones. His father, a man of stern principles, avoided eye contact when business came up, and his mother, though loving, spoke to him with a kind of gentleness reserved for the wounded. Their disappointment was never openly stated, but Alex felt it in the pauses between words, in the careful way they avoided bringing up his career. The cruelest irony was that Alex still possessed the intelligence, the drive, and the charisma that had propelled him forward before. He could have rebuilt, could have chosen honesty and started again on a smaller scale, but every attempt was shadowed by doubt. He had become so accustomed to shortcuts that he didn't know how to succeed without them. And so he hesitated, caught in a limbo where ambition warred with fear, where the old habits whispered temptations while the weight of the past warned him to resist. One evening, years after the fallout, Alex found himself standing outside the same modest office building where his career had first taken shape. He hadn't been there in so long, but something drew him back, as if searching for the version of himself who had once been eager, untainted, and ready to prove himself to the world. He stood at the glass doors, staring at his reflection in the faint glow of the streetlights, and realized the bitter truth. He could never return to that moment. The past was sealed, and the man he had been was gone. What remained was the choice of who he would be now. He could continue down the path of quiet self-destruction, a man defined by mistakes, or he could try, truly try, to rebuild, even if it meant years of slow, unglamorous effort. The line he had crossed long ago could not be undone, but perhaps a new line could be drawn, one he would refuse to cross again. It was not redemption he sought, for he knew redemption required more than good intentions. It required action, sacrifice, and consistency. What Alex longed for was something simpler: peace with himself. Whether he would ever find it remained uncertain, but as he turned away from the glass and stepped into the night, for the first time in years, he felt the faintest flicker of resolve. The moral dilemmas he had once dismissed as games now stood before him as signposts. Each new choice would carry its weight. Each decision would either push him further into the shadow or bring him closer to something resembling light. He knew this much, at least. He could not change the past, but the future, though fragile, was still waiting to be written.